The next thing we move on to is looking at mark making and use of line and edges. Now in front of us I have a collection of strange objects from my house. We have objects that are man-made. The bell, it's metal, it's probably brass, makes a noise, it's quite small scale, it's very regular, it's very shiny. And also in the man-made category we have this Lego man. He's made of plastic, he's regular, he's quite shiny, he looks a little bit grumpy. But also in the man-made category I have this piece of pottery. Now it's a broken piece of pottery and it's got a kind of rough edge, so it doesn't have the regularity of the other two man-made objects. The pattern on it, if we look quite close, is regular. It's made up of little dots, it's printed onto the surface, but the edge is rough. It feels very, very different. It's got a smooth surface to one side and a very rough, scratchy surface to another if I rub my finger on it. Now, I've got 3 stones on this table. I've got this Shivalingam. This is also a very regular shape. It's got a very smooth surface. It's quite nice to handle. And I have this flint. It's got a hole in it and a small rock inside it. So it goes all the way through. It's quite smooth, but it's not as regular as the Shivalingam. Look at this rock. It's quite a porous rock. You can see holes into the surface. So it doesn't have the same clean edge. It's slightly bumpy compared to the first stone. So if I take 2 leaves, this is from a grapevine and a wisteria. So whilst they're about the same scale, this has a very broken yet regular form to its edge, whereas this is quite smooth. You can almost see a line of symmetry down the middle of this leaf. You can probably see one on this leaf as well, but they aren't exactly symmetrical. They aren't flat on the table as well. From the side profile, they're not sitting completely flat. Have a look at the feather. The feather, it's very hard to work out where the edge of the feather is. All these soft features at the side here, where it's like the soft downy element versus the exposed part of the feather. This feather's been dyed. The colour of it is quite unnatural. But it's very lightweight versus the weight of the stone. So you have to convey all those things when you're starting your drawing and developing a drawing to describe the object, not just its shape, but its materiality. Now, I often refer to Bart because you know what I'm talking about. Bart Simpson is a cartoon character with a very clean outline. We know his face is yellow and it's coloured in flat yellow. His 3-dimensional form is suggested as he moves around in space. Now, if we look at any of our objects, there is not a clear, heavy, single outline around it. Look at the leaf, it's got an edge, a boundary between the green and the paper below. The bell, whilst it's darker in some places and lighter in others, you can see it's got a clear edge but not an outline. So when you're drawing, you don't want to be pressing very, very hard to generate a heavy outline. That's why I often suggest when you're drawing, you start with a light underdrawing while you're finding your drawing and working it out. And finally, we come to the worksheet. Now, in pre-COVID times, and hopefully afterward as well, we will handle primary source objects. But here, we have to rely upon secondary source. Now, in this case, there are 3 objects here, a feather, a leaf, and a spoon. And you can bring your past primary knowledge to this task because you've handled at some point all 3 of these objects. So, I'd like you to consider the material and its weight. I'd like you to label observations that would influence your choice when drawing. Now let's look at outline and edge. There isn't a clear outline around anything here. So think back to Bart Simpson, that's a clear outline. There is a clear edge onto this particular object. Look at the spoon. There's a clear edge in part of it, but unfortunately there isn't in the other part. Why not? When we're drawing it, would we want to draw a very heavy line down this side? Or would we want to draw a very light line? Would we have any line at all? I'm working this out. I can see a bit of shadow there. That's how I could plot that shape at that side. But if I was drawing a feather, I wouldn't want to draw a very, very heavy or jagged line around it. I'd have to draw very light, delicate little marks. So you need to think about the nature of these things and consider what comes forward. And I'm going to suggest something a little bit more complex here. Remember the bell? when I picked it up earlier and handled it and shook it, and it made a noise, and you might think the noise is never going to come through into the drawing. But within your artwork, noise might be something you incorporate later on in some kind of animation or other type of work in the future. But in a drawing or in illustration, you might want to suggest noise coming from the bell. You might draw the object and put little lines around it to suggest it's moving. You might have notes coming from it, musical notes. You might have kind of text coming out of a banner on it, something else coming from it. So the more knowledge you have of an object, its function, it's not just its physical properties, the more you can bring to your artwork later on.